This is a Polish city.
Polskość.
Dzień dobry.
Szczęść Boże. I think the Poles are not what stereotypes present them to be.
And these are the men and women who built Chicago.
They were reaching out to become Americans.
This is Polish radio.
Tak, to Polskie Radio Chicago.
Chicago will always be the capital of Polonia.
Good evening, I'm John Calloway and welcome to Chicago Stories. 1 out of every 10 Chicagoans can trace his or her heritage to Poland. This astounding migration brought strength and vigor that would fuel the boom of our prairie metropolis. They came with little more than the clothes on their backs and a strong work ethic, or later as displaced persons, or fleeing the effects of communism. There is no doubt that the Poles have left an indelible mark on the history and culture of Chicago. You can't even drive down the Kennedy Expressway without making a bow to this Polish icon. Join me now for this special episode of Chicago Stories, narrated by local Polish-American boy and renowned Wheel of Fortune host, Pat Sajak. Take a spin with us through the history and culture of Polonia, the story of Polish Chicago.
Chicago is the capital of Polish America. For more than 150 years, we've immigrated to Chicago, and it's become home. The city is the cultural, philanthropic, and fraternal center for the rest of the country's Polish community. Hello, I'm Pat Sajak. Growing up Polish in Chicago is an experience like none other. All 4 of my grandparents came from Warsaw, and my parents' home was filled with the sounds and smells of Poland. The food was fantastic, and like many other boys, I tried to learn the accordion. Luckily for me, there were other career options. Please join me for a tour through Polonia.
Growing up, Polish was fantastic. We had traditions and cultures that we always looked forward to. Christmas Eve was a big celebration for us. It was called Wigilia, which was on the Christmas Eve right after the first star came down. Easter was another big holiday. The Polish Constitution Day with the parade. It's on Columbus Drive. It's always the first Saturday in May.
There is so much to Polonia that we couldn't hope to cover all of it in this hour, but we do hope to show you a slice of the vibrant and exciting world that is Polish Chicago. But even before Chicago existed, Polish citizens were distinguishing themselves in the New World. Did you know that Poles were part of the first permanent settlement in the New World?
You can actually trace Polish-American history all the way back to Jamestown. There are Polish settlers in Jamestown in the 1620s, and supposedly they pulled the first strike off in the United States.
The English brought over some of the workmen, craftsmen, to help. They were pitchmen and glassmakers. Where the important thing comes in is that these workers were not given the same rights as Englishmen. Of course, that's something that you did not see in Pocahontas.
Why didn't Disney put them in? We miss in our study of our history as a community, our study of our nation as a whole, is the ability to recognize that there were lots of parts to it.
From way back, Poles have organized and risen up when their rights are trampled. It's a lesson the Soviet Union would learn in another 400 years. The Revolutionary War was another important point in Polish-American history. The spirit of the revolution drew both Thaddeus Kosciuszko and Kazimierz Pulaski to America.
Kosciuszko arrived here in the United States earlier than Pulaski. He was assigned as a military engineer and helped the Americans win the first battle of great importance, which was the Battle of Saratoga. Pulaski formed his own unit called the Pulaski Legion. He moved with his unit down south and helped defend Charleston.
Both probably hoped to go back to Poland. Of course, Pulaski unfortunately was killed at the Battle of Savannah. But Kosciuszko had a career afterwards, going back to Poland as a military commander.
In Poland, Kosciuszko helped win a measure of independence for his country, but shortly thereafter, Poland was crushed by its neighbors. This set the stage for mass emigration in the middle of the 1800s. At first, it was principally young men fleeing military conscription in occupying armies.
When Chicago was established and there was the first election of a mayor, Mayor Ogden, we do find two Polish names as voters. So, but of course, two is not enough to make a community.
The legendary first Pole in Chicago was a man named Anthony Smaszewski, and he came to Chicago in the 1850s and settled in this near Northwest Side area around Division. He and his family and a few other Poles founded one of these small societies, the St. Stanislaus Society, and petitioned the bishop.
The bishop assigned a priest to St. Stan's, and in 1867, the first Polish Catholic parish was established in Chicago. Now there was a focal point for the Polish community in Chicago.
My grandmother, she used to tell me that she was very young, but she was in the steeple watching the fire that took place across the river.
The Catholic Church was really the center of the Polish community, and in many ways still is.
It's still embedded in Poles to try to be near the church. I've lived here all my life. My father and my mother did speak Polish, but not my sisters couldn't speak a word of Polish, and I never, to my disgust really, never learned the language. Going to the school next door, you could say your prayers in Polish. As a matter of fact, the good nuns had pounded into your head.
There's a suffix in Polish, O-W-O, pronounced ovo. If you put that after a community name or a parish name, it becomes the name for the whole neighborhood. So like the St. Stanislaus district is Stanisławowo in Polish.
In 1870, this original Polish parish served 400 families. By 1900, there were more than 40,000 souls attending St. Stan's. It was the largest Catholic parish in the United States. Not surprisingly, factions began to tear at the fabric of the community.
Polish Americans referred to themselves as a fourth part of Poland that was going to save the rest of Poland, and always saw their role in Polish politics as one of, giving aid and embracing Polish culture and helping to reestablish Polish independence.
The friction was over how to do that.
Do you affect Polish independence by working within the American system, or do you just use America as a recruiting base? The first organization that was organized was a fraternal called the Polish Roman Catholic Union.
They were dedicated first and foremost to being Catholic, and second to establishing a Polish middle class who could use its excess wealth to help occupied Poland gain independence. The Polish Roman Catholic Union helped many turn their wages into real middle-class stability.
We take care of our membership regarding insurance and annuity products. With our income, with our profits, we assist language programs, we assist dance groups that continue our culture. We also continue the alliance with the Roman Catholic Church.
The other organization founded was the Polish National Alliance. Its primary goal was Polish independence.
Our founders were part of the insurrection in Poland. They left Poland. They came here and they saw the need for organizing our Polonia.
The two groups began to have a drift between themselves, and Holy Trinity Parish was created as a parish in which the nationalist versus the Roman Catholic group of St. Stanislaus Kostka would be divided.
As it turns out, both of these groups were able to do this in a certain way. In the period from 1905 to 1917, the Polish community here in the United States organized a so-called Kościuszko Fund for National Defense. Young men were training for the moment that they could go back and liberate the old country. World War I is important for the Poles in that the Polish state was reestablished in 1918.
With the question of independence settled for the moment, the PRCU and the PNA were able to mend fences. Today, both concentrate more on financial security and the continuation of Polish culture.
We have a sports and youth program. We have the newspaper, the Dziennik Związkowy. We have radio station WPNA.
The various activities foster or promote the insurance programs, but promote a tie with our fatherland, country of Poland.
But getting back to the late 1800s, who were these immigrants coming to America in the first place?
Most of the Poles who came to the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century were unskilled peasant laborers. They came to places like Chicago that had steel mills and stockyards and tanneries and other heavy industries where, you had to do back-breaking labor, but it didn't require a lot of skills.
It's what we call the immigration za chlebem, or for bread. It's an economic migration. They settled first on the north side, but then they spread throughout the city. There are 5 major Polonias that are established almost immediately.
They settled in the lower west side near the Burlington Railroad and the Ship Canal, and in Bridgeport in the back of the yards where work in the stockyards was plentiful. And finally, they settled in South Chicago where steel mills lit up the night skies. The original idea was to save money to buy a farm in Poland. Some did return, but for most, the dream was not realistic.
The Polish-American dream was a bungalow someplace with a little piece of land in the back. For that first generation, it was that little piece of land, grow some beans and tomatoes in the back.
America was also a chance for these conquered peoples to also establish their own identity. So it's not always a case of just rapid acculturalization to American society, but it's also an attempt to regain that which you didn't have in the old country.
And at the center of community life, there was always a church. St. Stanislaus Kostka, Holy Trinity, of course, St. Adalbert's on the near west side, St. Michael's, St. John Cantius, St. John of God, 5 Holy Martyrs, St. Mary of the Angels, St. Hedwig's, and St. Hyacinth's along the Milwaukee Avenue corridor. In all, more than 60 Polish Catholic parishes were created.
A Polish sociologist came to Chicago in the 1930s, and he went to South Chicago and he asked the Poles, why are you building these magnificent churches when you have very little food and you live in terrible conditions and you work for very low wages? And the Polish peasant response was, I want to die under my own bells. The idea that you would have some sort of anchor in this new world. They knew they weren't going back.
Polish-American Catholics developed their parishes to a high degree of what sociologists call institutional completeness. It was quite possible, and not only possible, but likely, that someone living in a Polish neighborhood would spend 90% of his or her time in a Polish milieu.
This was true even years later.
I didn't know that anybody else existed except Polish Americans. In fact, when I went away to high school, I had a very, very rude awakening.
Andrew Shabillo's family started out in the old Stanisławowo neighborhood, but later his father moved his landmark White Eagle Banquet Hall to Niles, where it is today.
He was in the right place at the right time after World War II, and so it took off. I mean, the whole wedding thing, because everybody was getting married after World War II.
Many family businesses in the Polish community revolved around food. Aurelia Puczynski grew up helping out at her grandfather's catering business.
After school, I'd go over and I'd help the ladies peel the potatoes and the carrots for whatever event was happening that night. That was what you did.
Of course, there was an upside to having a grandfather with a kitchen.
Every day for lunch, I went to my grandfather's catering hall. My friends would go home and they'd have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch. And my grandfather just, I mean, his little princess, oh, honey, what would you like for lunch?
Many of the banquet halls, like the Wonderland, have faded into memory, but the White Eagle continues on.
I guess I'm proud of my father. I think it's a testament to him that people think of us in a historical way, that this somehow has to fit into their life.
Polish businessmen were the exception rather than the rule at the start of the 20th century. Most men had to leave the tight-knit community to work, but when their days were over, they returned home to the Polish neighborhoods. Union organizers didn't know if they could get the Polish worker involved in their struggle.
They were often seen as unskilled workers who were unorganizable, that they would be strike breakers. They weren't seen as Americans.
Polish Americans have very strong work ethic, combined with a very strong commitment to independence, freedom, and liberty, and what's fair.
Once the union organizers were able to break through the language barriers, peasant clannishness could be transformed into union solidarity. Certainly from the 1930s on, Poles and other Eastern European immigrants have been really a backbone of the CIO and other industry unions.
They came here for bread, for economic stability, and they were enormously successful. Polish Americans were not only hard at work, but also working hard at play, too. A cultural touchstone that began with these initial waves of immigration is polka music.
The polka is a phenomenon, an American phenomenon, kind of urban American music. The theory that is most often followed is that it started in Czechoslovakia. However, it traveled to the United States and became integrated with jazz and rock music and country music and brass bands, and as a result, we have this wonderful thing which is American polka.
The granddaddy of all polka bars in Chicago is the Baby Doll Polka Club on the South Side.
My husband, Eddie Carosa, wrote the song, You Are My Baby Doll, polka. It was number one hit of all the polkas in the entire world. We opened the Baby Doll Polka Club in 1954 on 73rd and Western. As I say, it was the most popular place in Chicago. We didn't allow any musician to play nothing but a polka 6 nights a week.
What I remember most is a Sunday afternoon at the Baby Doll. I was probably maybe 4 or 5 years old, people all over the place, and I'm a little kid running around, and I enjoyed the music so much that I would sit on a drummer's lap, and that's got me into the music, and I've been doing it ever since.
The Carosas had a radio program and later a television show in the 70s. All kinds of music are integral to the Polish experience, and the Lyra Ensemble is one of the Polish community's and Chicago's gems.
So many people equate Polish music with folk music, but in fact, what is special about Lyra is that we perform the entire spectrum of Polish song and dance. All of our performances and appearances are tied to Polish or Polish American anniversaries, celebrations. We use the culture to explain who we are as people of Polish ancestry in America.
After World War II, a new wave of immigration would redefine Polonia. And 40-some years after their arrival, Poles would step onto the world stage as yet another wave of immigration would reinvigorate the story of Polish Chicago.
This is just like Poland, to be very honest. I want to cry because it is a beautiful, beautiful country.
We came here with 3 suitcases in 1981. That was the best place to start, having lots of friends, huge Polish community in Chicago. So, I mean, I would recommend this place to anybody else.
It's kind of my yearly event that I come and I look for Polish art and Polish jewelry.
What a great opportunity to come out here and see the polka bands and taste the sausages from different places. I've had the potato pancakes, I've had the cheese blintzes, I've had the pierogies. I've had so many good foods here. I love this stuff.
Today we have Okochum and Żywiec. And that's the two popular beers here in Chicago. It has probably double the alcohol content that American beer has, so I guess you can say you get more bang for your buck.
We never went hungry in a Polish neighborhood.
Every year for more than 23 years, Taste of Polonia at the Copernicus Center on Chicago's northwest side has attempted to bring together all the elements of Polish Chicago for a weekend.
Our mission for the Taste of Polonia is to promote and let everyone in the whole Chicagoland area learn about our Polish traditions, our Polish foods, our Polish culture.
By the early 1900s, the Polish community had spread from its original neighborhood boundaries. One of the clearest migrations was up Milwaukee Avenue.
Up until a few years ago, you'd be able to walk into a store and not even be able to discuss anything because you didn't speak Polish.
St. Hyacinth's Church is a landmark of that migration.
Dlatego każdorazowy biskup Rzymu. Dlatego biskup Rzymu, bo tam umarł pierwszy biskup tego miasta, święty Piotr.
Three years ago, we began to restore the church, and we repainted. It took us 18 months to repaint the entire interior of the church. The cost of the whole project, together with other improvements that we were making, was about $1 million. And the Polish people supported the project.
More than 8,000 people attend St. Hyacinth's each week. They celebrate 9 masses each weekend, 5 of which are in Polish. One church that anchors the South Side Polish community is Five Holy Martyrs.
Growing up in Five Holy Martyrs Parish, we had Franciscan sisters that were teaching us, and the majority of them spoke Polish. The street words you'd pick up, they weren't from the Franciscan sisters, though. Only time my folks spoke Polish is when they didn't want my brothers, sisters, and I to find out what's going on.
The neighborhood around Five Holy Martyrs reflects its Polish heritage.
Archer Avenue does have a large population of different businesses, travel, delicatessens, of course. Like any other neighborhood, people are proud to show their heritage by putting their name in their native language.
Churches and neighborhoods continue to serve the diverse population of Polish Chicago, including the wave of immigrants who came here after World War II.
My parents came to the U.S. In 1953. They were unable to go back to Poland because of the change of the government there.
This group of approximately 75,000 was called displaced persons.
For the first 4 or 5 years, they assumed they were going to go back to Poland. For the Polish community, it was an interesting thing. They brought in a shot in the arm.
Because they tended to be often also not of a peasant background, but of an educated class, a military class, and they looked at the world in a different way than the Polish Americans did.
They became settled here, in some cases trying to form a mini Poland again, with Polish Saturday schools, Polish scouting, Polish theater, Polish radio stations.
Saturday school could be especially trying for kids striving to find an American identity.
Oh, we at times hated it. And I think most kids, when they're forced to do something, rebel. But it's a skill that I only came to appreciate much later. In the late 89, 1990, when the government in Poland changed, I did a lot of transactions representing U.S. companies doing business in Poland.
Holy Trinity Church holds a Saturday school for more than 500 children.
This church was built in 1905 by Polish immigrants. At that time, Polish immigrants used to live here on this area.
As the Polish community dispersed, Holy Trinity and the original Polish neighborhood around St. Stanislaus Kostka began to decline. One of the biggest reasons was the construction of the Kennedy Expressway.
My father was in Congress at the time with Congressman Dan Rostenkowski, and the Polish Americans in the delegation just said, "Time out, I don't think so. Isn't there some way you can reconfigure it?" And they wound up, building that bend around the church.
Saving the church meant saving the original structure of the Polish community in Chicago. But Dan Rostenkowski foresaw a problem.
And I pointed out to them, to the pastor particularly, "Father, you've got a park across the street. You've got railroad tracks to the east of you. People will not live here."
Rostenkowski was right. St. Stan's no longer serves the Polish community, but Polish political clout saved this historic icon. Some wonder why Polish political power hasn't had more of an impact.
I think Poles will go to their great reward never understanding why we never had a Polish mayor in the city of Chicago when we had the population.
The larger reason is the kind of strategy of politics that the Polish American group tended to follow. They practiced bloc politics. Let's stick together, perfect the unity of the ethnic groups, and vote as a bloc. Now that works fine if you are a majority in the city, but that doesn't work in a city like Chicago, which is large and diverse and where the Poles were never more than, say, 20 or 25% of the population.
Which is not to say that the Polish community hasn't had influential leaders. Roman Puczynski was one of those.
I'm Roman C. Puczynski, Democratic candidate for Congress from the 11th District on Chicago's Great Northwest Side.
My father saw his mission as being a voice for people who otherwise would have no voice. He was a newspaper reporter for the Sun-Times for 20 years. One day, Mayor Daley, who noticed him and asked him if he'd ever given any thought to running for Congress. And he jumped at the chance and said he would, and wound up being a congressman for 14 years.
Clout had saved St. Stanislaus, but sheer will helped Holy Trinity hang on. The 1,600-seat church was down to 200 congregants 20 years ago. In the mid-'80s, the Archdiocese of Chicago reestablished the church not as a regular parish, but as a mission serving Polish-language speakers.
I came here almost 15 years ago. It was February 14, 1988, and we started from nothing. And now we have a very, very big community. Now we have 4 masses. 10 years ago, our parishioner asked me to take care and to establish a Polish Saturday school. But it seemed to me at the time it was absolutely impossible. So I gave him a very, very hard decision, my decision. If you will find 40 children, I will start to establish Polish school Saturday. And they gave me a list with 70. So it was no choice for me. I had to do something.
The school provides education from students of 3 years old till 18. We teach children how to read, write, and speak Polish. And We also provide have our religion classes. It's hard, wake up early morning every Saturday. It's fun.
Tu jest park! Wow!
Holy Trinity Saturday School principally serves the children of recent immigrants, the ones that have come since the beginning of solidarity in Poland and the fall of the Soviet Union. But before that, a trickle of immigrants came during the communist era. One group was the Polish Highlanders. The communist government found it easier to let these fiercely independent mountain people go rather than suppress them. Highlander regional pride continues in Chicago.
I myself am a Polski Góral, or a Polish mountaineer. My grandmother told me to never date a girl from the north side of Chicago because they weren't really Poles, they weren't Polish mountaineers.
From the Tatra Mountains in southern Poland, they settled mainly on the south side, where their lodge, with its traditional restaurant, stands today.
This is a kwaśnica, which is a sauerkraut soup. We have a very famous folklore legend of Janosik, who was a brigand, and this plate represents his favorite dishes. This is a cutlet, which is like a chopped steak, done in traditional Polish Highlander style, with plenty of mushrooms for embellishment and a heated cheese. One of the primary occupations up in the mountains was shepherding. There was a lot of cheeses, very nice cheeses developed there as part of the diet. After this hearty meal, what would it be like without a dessert? One is the makowiec, which is the poppy seed cake, and the other is sernik. Again, it's a kind of a cheesecake. A Highlander tea, which also is it's very, very good when the weather starts to get nippy because it's got a certain amount of vodka in it.
Another fascinating aspect is their music.
They'd hear different sounds of nature and try and imitate that. And out of that evolution of music, they developed their own style.
It's dissonant. It's that sound of echoing in the mountains. And it makes the music fantastic. And it's also sung with this raw but very different, I mean, it's really a style you have to learn properly. This white voice, they call it in Polish.
Others made their way here during the communist era as well. Kazia Bober came to Chicago in 1974. She immediately set about trying to get visas for her children left in Poland. When she finally succeeded, she felt the pressure to give them a better life.
Because I worked for somebody else, there was no money to support family. So I decided to open business, and I work by myself day and night. And I send my kids to school to learn English.
Kazia's Deli is now a Polish institution.
This is really Polish. Pierogi with sauerkraut, spinach, mushroom, that's fruit, plum, cucumber with sour cream, that's the Polish. We have kabanosy, the thin sausage, potato pancakes, golubki. They like it very much, yes. Barbara Bush and President Bush. President Clinton ate pierogi. I never thought my business will be so successful. Never. But I'm glad.
Okay. Not today. Thank you.
Sure. I love my country. but I like to stay here. Always I would like to think, I like to make a better life for my kids. So I did it.
For some, the identification with just a few Polish foods has an upside and a downside.
Sometimes we concentrate too much in ethnic groups on the food, but the truth is that ethnics eat well. And what is important to remember is that a lot of the foods that Americans are aware of in Polish cuisine are in fact folk food, country food, peasant food.
Bogna Solak's Oak Mill Bakery shows another facet of Polish cuisine.
Most of people here think about the kind of simple cooking, but Polish pastry shops are very sophisticated. The pączki, we selling them year-round, but they're mostly in need on the day before Mardi Gras. It's like on Fat Tuesday. The Polish also celebrate Fat Thursday. That's when we're starting on Fat Thursday and we're ending on Fat Tuesday, which give us whole weekend to eat. And this is another Polish pastry, which they call kremash. It's a dough, cut it and fill it with the prune preserve and some vanilla cream. For a long time I couldn't understand the whole ideas of brownie because it reminded me like when we were kids and a grandma was baking a cake or in an oven. We were opening oven, shaking the pans, and when the cake fall, then we were happy. That's what it is. To jest dobre. Yeah. We were checking on the color. Yeah. She is pulling lemon-flavored gelatin over just to preserve the fruit. This is a very traditional decoration on a cake, how they do a lot of cakes in Poland. Wedding cakes come to Poland in like between 14th and 16th century. Polish-Americans' wedding can be very big. We have many times weddings, especially the Highlanders, 500 people, 600 people, even 1,000 people is not such a rare occasion. One of the traditions would stay for all these years and was adopted till today, and even Polish-American weddings they enjoy this, is they call oczepiny. That's mean unveiling at midnight. The bride take the veil off and she putting little white cap. That's mean from the bride you become a woman.
While traditions were still being observed, other mainstays of Polish Chicago were disappearing in the 1970s.
A symbolic date would be the closing of Chicago stockyards in 1971, an important event not only for Poles in Chicago, but for Chicago in general. But all of these original neighborhoods, like Polish Downtown and Back of the Yards in South Chicago, which were based on heavy industry, went into economic decline.
They should point out that it's a community that's already looking beyond industrial jobs by the 60s, 70s, and 80s. I mean, the younger children are already becoming college educated.
A turning point was on the horizon for communist Poland as well. The election of a Polish pope heralded this change. Pope John Paul II would become an advocate to end communism.
It sucked your breath out of your body. It was so overwhelming. The idea that the Pope not only wasn't Italian, but now was Polish.
The Holy Father's visit to Chicago in 1979 was a joyous event for all of Chicago's Catholics, but the Polish spirit was especially lifted.
The electricity in the air was everyone was so excited. I myself was able to work for his papal visit through an Eagle Scout project. Everyone was very excited. The streets were loaded, the windows were loaded with people, signs in Polish, Witamy, welcome.
The election of Pope John Paul II and the gathering solidarity movement in Poland had a transforming effect on the community.
the Polish American community has long wanted and deserves respect. The psyche in the community was much lifted by a recognition by the general community that in fact Polish Americans and people of Polish heritage had a lot to contribute to our world culture and to our world society.
In Poland, workers led by Lech Walesa stood up against communist control. The communist government forced many of Solidarity's supporters out of Poland. Others were stranded here when the government cracked down.
I came to the United States in the summer of 1981, and I supposed to go back home in December 20 of 1981. And on December 13, the Polish government decided to make martial law in Poland, and they stuck me here.
Eventually, Solidarity won.
And communism was brought to its knees, which was totally mind-boggling to some people. They could not understand how you could hope to take on such a monolithic, powerful, vengeful, devious, destructive menace with ordinary people with an ideal.
This struggle opened the way for a new wave of Polish immigrants.
And first we decided to come to the United States for 1 year, just to learn English, to see this country. But after years we decided that we find our place, so we staying here, and that will be a homeland for my daughter.
This new group has built their own institutions to complement existing ones and to fill their different needs. One example is Polvision Television and Polnet Radio.
We have 2 hours in our television, and every day. So we are trying to do half an hour local news, half an hour Polish news from Poland, and 1 hour it depends.
This is the only station which has a daily production, and we live in a community and we try to produce this for community. What is our pride? It's a Monitor Polvision, our local daily news show.
Dobry wieczór, jest środa, 21 sierpnia.
I try to be like a bridge between people who don't speak English and them who try to figure out what is going on in Polish community.
Władze miasta zapewniają jednak, że
we can compare maybe to CLTV, which is the most local station.
Śmierci. Prokurator Deczkowski dodał, że
This is a great job, and also this is something we can do for our listeners. You know, I wouldn't trade my listeners for $1 million because I understand that they need those media, they need Polish media, and because there are people who came here just 1 month ago to 2 years ago, they don't understand English, they want to learn about the world around them.
We're getting so many phone calls, and people are like calling us, and they are saying, yes, you guys helped me a lot. Because I moved here to the States, I was alone.
This is our mission to show them everything around.
With almost half a century separating this wave of immigration from the last, there's bound to be confusion within the community.
We've got new immigrants who sometimes are challenged with regard to the English language, and then we've got second and third generation Americans who haven't really learned the Polish language, so there are communication difficulties.
As the new immigrants find their way in a new country, old ways must change to accommodate them.
On the other hand, every time a new wave of immigration comes in, there's new blood, new ideas, and a new excitement in life.
For those who have just arrived, it's a matter of creating an American life. But for each succeeding generation, there's a strong desire never to forget where we came from.
I run into people who are Polish American. Their family has been in this country for generations. They should have forgotten long ago where they came from, and they remember.
For me, the most important Polish word is Polskość. Polskość means Polishness. It means a rootedness. It means looking back at one's own culture. The Polish ability to create community and friendship.
even though you're third or fourth generation, the heritage, it's still in your heart. I mean, we're still proud to be Polish.